Right now by historian and military writer Eliot Wilson as we pass the last few moments ahead of the 2-minute silence on Armistice Day at 11 o'clock. Good morning to you, Eliot.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. I was discussing with JK a little bit earlier about how just significant it is, and they all try and get, I don't know why, perhaps we're becoming more and more aware of how significant days like this are and these moments are where we do say thank you and remember the incredible sacrifices by men, and women. But let's face it, largely, young men whose lives were sacrificed for us to have the freedom to, witter on air and give our opinions on social media and live the life that we lead. Do you worry that, as a historian, that actually a lot of young people today, they really have forgotten how high the price is to have this freedom?
I think there is a danger that we're becoming, or certainly younger generations are becoming more detached, and it's becoming more a kind of theoretical idea because, the First World War veterans are now all dead. There are relatively few Second World War veterans, and they're all extremely old now because it's 80 years since the war ended, so you're well into your 90s. So I think it's becoming a kind of historical exercise more than it is something which there's a real connection to. And it's important that we remember not only the dead of both world wars, but of all the conflicts we've been in since, and that we do remember, as you say, the remarkable and exceptional service that the armed forces have given up to the point of the greatest sacrifice that can be demanded of people on behalf of their country.
Well, indeed, and it was always, very, very obvious, I think, to everyone with the late Queen when she attended these services as someone who had served, on the home front and who had lost loved ones and was so aware of that sacrifice when she was attending these ceremonies representing the country. What did you make of Prince William, her grandson, the Prince of Wales? He's urged young people to wear a poppy for Remembrance Day in a video address back to students aged 9 to 14, telling them how important it is for all generations to commemorate the war dead.
I think the Prince of Wales makes a good point, and I think his argument that it's something that is ongoing, that it's not just an historical event, but that it's about who we are and how we project ourselves into the future is important. And I think he's right not to sort of wave a stick about this and to encourage rather than demand.
Yes.
I think when we demand that people do X or Y, it seems very much against the spirit of what we're,
Exactly.
I think he got the tone right, and I hope people will listen to him. And I think, I think we are observing it fairly well these days, more so than I would say 20 or 30 years ago, probably. We observe not only Remembrance Sunday, but also Armistice Day now. And I think there is a keen awareness among a lot of people, certainly, of the sacrifices that the armed forces have made. The worry is that, of course, with the armed forces so small now, there are relatively few people who know people who've served or are served.
And our politicians routinely, whereas in politicians of previous generations will have served themselves, often conscripts who've been officers, and they had that personal experience. I mean, actually, we've had, in my lifetime, we've had Falklands and the Iraq War and Afghanistan War, but also, of course, we're watching right now war in Europe with Ukraine, and of course watching in what's been going on in Gaza as well. It's become perhaps a bit more real. Do you think that most people are aware of sometimes when that sacrifice is something that may be needed from the next generation down? Because I'm very aware these days, the freedom of speech, many of the freedoms we have, our democracy, these are very fragile things, and a lot of the polling seems to show again and again that it is younger people, younger generations who don't value them. They don't value freedom of speech. They don't value the ability to vote and have democracy, democratic votes. They'd rather a strong man leader, and perhaps just don't understand the significance of be careful what you want.
Well, I think there's a fundamental point that, defence of the realm is the fundamental duty of any government. I think any government which ignores that does so at its peril. And, we do see people who sort of say, oh, yes, the armed force is great, but we're not willing to spend more on defence. Well, if you spend money on defence, the spending on everything else potentially doesn't matter. I think Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, put it bluntly when he said earlier in the year, you can have your healthcare and your benefits and all that kind of stuff, but you better start learning Russian. And he exaggerated, but he made a good point that defence is the cornerstone of everything else we do. And if we don't protect that, there's nothing else to protect.
And there is this idea, isn't there? Well, war is bad, and stopping wars, even with Donald Trump. I'm the guy. I'm the president for peace, not the president for war. But understanding that that sometimes war is necessary. To Israel to get your hostages back, Ukraine to defend your nation state, for us to fight against the Nazis, not just to defend Britain, but to free Europe. I mean, sometimes war is the least worst thing you can do.
Absolutely. You know, if we just said that people should give their wallets to muggers in the streets, there would be no crime. But that's not
Yeah.
that's not a sustainable way of organizing a society. And sometimes, and it should be the last resort, and any soldier will tell you this, you do have to say this far and no further. This time we have to be prepared to fight for what we are standing up for and what we believe in. And nobody wants to do that. I think this idea that, you know, Remembrance Sunday is about glorying war is absurd.
Right.
There have to be times when it's the only option for us to take, because unfortunately the world is not full of reasonable people like us.
Unfortunately, that's very true. Eliot Wilson, historian and military writer, thank you very much indeed. Well, it's 10:59 right now. Tom Slater's still with me. It's very noticeable to me when I interview military leaders, actually, how often they are the ones who are most opposed to any conflict, because they know the reality of it. They're not war, you know, armchair generals like myself.
No, exactly. War is hell, but sometimes it is necessary, as you say, which is precisely what we'll be marking in just a few moments' time.
Yeah, and we've got the ceremony, of course, at the Cenotaph on Whitehall, and obviously a very solemn ceremony, and we're going to be marking that in just a couple of moments as we approach the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, when people across the UK commemorate the end of the First World War, and of course all of the many, many fallen heroes in this country.